I thought that after my 20 plus minute TMNT video that I had gotten the Ninja Turtle bug out of my system. But no, after seeing it 3 times, 2 in the theater and once at home, Mutant Mayhem has lit a fire in me that can't be quelled unless I do something drastic. Something that I'd been waiting 10 years to do. Pay my taxes. I mean, play Out of the Shadows. I was kidding. Wait, what?! It's a third-person hack-and-slash game released in 2013 and developed by Redfly Studio, the developer of that cancelled Darth Maul game, where George Lucas infamously wanted Maul and Darth Talon to team up despite being separated by a century and a half. So the team just had to appease him by making the game about a clone of Maul instead. I will never get over that. Ever. After that game was eventually cancelled, it's not really clear what happened. This AA TMNT game just sort of popped out of nowhere. It was announced in March of 2013, showcased at that year's E3 with a playable demo, and then released in August of the same year with presumably that same demo releasing on PSN, Steam, and Xbox Live, which is how I heard about it. I had initially wanted to interview some ex-Redfly Studio employees on my documentarian shit, but I couldn't really find any who were on Twitter, and I didn't really feel comfortable bothering them on LinkedIn. So the world may never know until somebody without social anxiety covers this topic. I remember playing this demo over and over again as a 12-year-old on my 360, somehow hoping that playing it enough would cause the demo to unlock the full game, like some sort of Oprah-esque charity for broke kids whose parents don't like using their credit cards online. Yeah, depressing childhood fantasies aside, finally playing the entire game now through emulation, I kind of like it a lot, with an asterisk. First off, this is sort of an adaptation of the 2012 show's first season, from the designs to Donnie just having a crush on April. Even the sewer in Shredder's lair look the same, although all of what's adapted is the superficial stuff. You're not going to get any real story or major ties into the show or anything. You fight some purple dragons who are working for the Shredder, who wants to steal from the Krang, and all of it culminates in a second fight with the Shredder in Dimension X, which is just the same looking Krang facility, and that's it. There's nods to plot lines from the series, like Leo and Karai's weird relationship. Just ignore that they're related, guys, I promise. If you ignore that part, it's okay. But for the most part, this is just a standard Turtles story, which is kind of what you'd expect from a AA game. The comic cutscenes are cool. They are a little bare looking, but an okay comic book cutscene is miles better than a shitty 3D one. It's a shame that the rest of the game does not look like this at all. Out of the Shadows falls victim to the 2010s design philosophy of being hyper-realistic. And you could tell that with the turtles' faces. Oh god. The faces are technically well done. They managed to have a lot of detail, and each of the turtles look different from each other, and they're also pretty expressive. It's just that the designs themselves are very off-putting. While it's admirable that they look like real turtles, I don't want them to look like real turtles, especially when juxtaposed against more cartoonish, less impressive models like April or Splinter. They look like they just don't belong. I get that I'm kind of biased towards cell shading and colorful games in general, and for a low-budget 3D game, it really doesn't look that bad. The environments themselves are actually fucking amazing, especially for a game of this scale. The city specifically is so detailed. I was kind of astonished what a simple bump to 1080p can do for a 10-year-old game. At the very least, seeing all these locations from the 2012 series adapted in a more realistic style is interesting to see as a fan, to say the least. The original soundtrack by Tyler Pearsall was also surprisingly good to listen to. Even if you don't end up playing this game, you should give it a listen on YouTube, it's good shit. As usual for the time period, this game's combat was just compared to the Arkham series, which is really lazy. It's the Dark Souls of late 2000s, early 2010s game reviewing. Not to say that this game's combat is amazing, as I'll elaborate on in a minute, but it doesn't really play much like Batman at all, save for countering and occasionally using projectile gadgets, which I don't remember being trademarked by Rocksteady. This is much closer to other hack and slash or mainly beat 'em up games. You can punch, kick, use special attacks, the works. Although items like ninja stars and grenades feel like they do absolutely fucking nothing, and also cause damage to the other turtles if you hit them, so just don't waste your time with them at all. You can buy secondary weapons for each turtle, which work as another item. Basically, they add a couple powerful attacks when you equip them, but save for Raph's Iron Fists, you can't just equip them and use it for an entire encounter, which is a shame. It'd be nice to see Leo use his Darth Maul sword, but that would mean a whole new set of animations as opposed to just the one. Surprisingly, you can seamlessly switch between the 4 turtles during battle, each of which have their own advantages and disadvantages, like Raph being powerful but slow and Mikey being fast but weak, which isn't something you always see added in 3D beat-em-up games. The upgrades feel like they actually do something and can turn the tides in gameplay, which is something I can't even say for other games like Bayonetta 3. Just to be clear, I like Bayonetta 3, but those upgrades are fucking useless. What you end up with is something very, very button mashy, but is able to be somewhat fun in short bursts, although the game's final chapter is way too fucking long. Not because it's difficult or anything, but because Out of Shadows pulls the cheapest move a game can do, and just throws waves and waves of enemies at you all at once before you can proceed. That's the entirety of the final mission, and it got old very fast. You don't just fight in corridors or on rooftops, there's some small set pieces, which I wasn't expecting in the slightest. The fact that Red Fly was willing to attempt set pieces like fighting Karai on top of a train, or April slowly creeping around a warehouse, and achieved at making them not entirely suck, is an achievement that the devs should be proud of. I especially like the section where you play the game from Baxter Stockman's perspective as he watches the turtles on a CCTV. It very much gave me Killer is Dead vibes. There's lots of just random attention to detail here, like the accuracy to the 2012 series designs, the turtles' eyes going white when combat starts, all of the knockout animations never got old, the fact that the main theme is an edited version of Turtle Power from the first movie. It's all very, very good stuff. Although this is where that asterisk comes into play. There's some stuff that you either have to ignore or just put up with in Out of the Shadows. To put it plainly, the game lacks a certain level of polish you'd expect. I've dealt with a lot in terms of unfinished or buggy games, so each and every time I saw a weapon model glitch out for a moment, or just standard Arial font pop up whenever I completed a slightly annoying minigame, it made me chuckle. I will say that this is a game that heavily benefits from being emulated on a modern PC. Despite liking it, Out of the Shadows was undeniably released in a subpar condition. I personally don't remember it being that bad, but I was 12. Apparently, the bugs were so bad, the performance so disappointing, that the PS3 release was delayed until April of 2014. So not only does that make the PS3 release the best one, which isn't ever the case for any game, but that's an 8-month delay, something that you don't really see at all anymore, save for the occasional Switch release. The AI for both the turtles and the foot will often just get stuck and not move unless you hit them or take control. There isn't a lock-on mechanic at all, which is kind of the bare minimum for any third-person action game. The omission of one makes it difficult to keep up with one person at a time, which is also due to the less than stellar camera that easily gets caught or completely blocked by the environment. It's a 2005 camera in a 2013 game, and it makes boss fights especially a pain in the ass. Speaking of those, enemies don't have health bars at all, which is good for the general user experience since it prevents the screen from getting cluttered. However, not having them at all makes you lose track of how far you are in a boss fight. Save for the Baxter fight, which had an obvious health bar of sorts by slowly destroying his Mouser suit, there's no visual indication of how long the fights with Karai or Shredder will go. It's a very minor thing, but it plays into how this game missed some of the smaller, important stuff. The campaign is also criminally short. Including the prologue, there's only 5 missions, coming in at about 4 hours. As much as I attest that I love short games, and I still do, this is one case where I would have loved to see a few more missions. I will say that there is a substantial amount of additional content. You can unlock concept art, which is always great to see, complete combat challenges for each of the brothers, and play the arcade mode, which is sort of a recreation of the main story as a side-scrolling beat-em-up. Rarely do you ever see a game remake itself. While I do like that stuff, I kinda wish there was less emphasis on that and more on polishing and evolving the main campaign. Maybe a mission with Dog Pound or Fish Face, or really just anything else. I don't really hold this against the game since Red Fly was a very small studio, and this was a very small scope title released for only $15 at the time. Out of the Shadows is a game where, if you go in with any preconceived notions, any sort of comparison to other games, you're going to be disappointed. And I wouldn't entirely blame you. This is a rough game, but it's one that was fun. Part of that may be nostalgia, sure. However, the fact of the matter is that the bad stuff never overshadowed the parts I genuinely enjoyed. Regardless of whether or not you like this game, you should have the choice to play it. But you don't. Legally, that is. The topic of delisted games is one that's very important, but often too simplified. The problem I have when people talk about delisted games online is that they typically only talk about the most notable cases or titles that they specifically care about. Neither of which are inherently bad. It's how you get people interested in a topic that is undeniably boring. Licensing fees, publishing rights, and developers' scrapped projects aren't all that intriguing to people who aren't like me. But using the same popular examples over and over and over doesn't really show how widespread this issue really is. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard people talking about delisted games, only to bring up Scott fucking Pilgrim for the 70th time. Even I've done it. Talking about these games as if they're relics that belong in a museum doesn't really accurately paint a picture of the issue, which is the other reason why I felt like I needed to talk about this game outside of just pure nostalgia. There has to be hundreds of games like Out of the Shadows, smaller games released to no fanfare, only to wither away due to the license expiring or some other reason. The cold hard truth is that this game is never going to be remastered. Valve accidentally relisting this game for 5 minutes earlier this year was the closest we'll ever get to this game being readily available again. Redfly Studio is now Gaming Core Austin, a developer who makes what I can only call fake-looking mobile games and that American Ninja Warrior game. I don't know, man, this shit kind of makes Out of Shadows look like it's worth $70. Nickelodeon has completely moved on with the license, and Activision hasn't really looked back to this era of their history at all. And even when they do, any attempt at re-releasing their older games have met the same fate, or have been shot down before they ever got into the air. Without trying to fearmonger, these are the downsides of an all-digital future, at least one without certain measures in place to prevent games becoming completely lost to time. Outside of the first few trailers, the website, any other promotional material, or even the Facebook have been archived, at least to my knowledge, leaving reviewers' knee-jerk reactions or players' hot takes as all that's left of Out of the Shadows' legacy. You can chalk it up to nostalgia, contrarianism, whatever you'd like. But games like Out of the Shadows deserve to be revisited on their own merits, separated from their sales, review scores, or their depressing outcomes. Yeah, that's all I got to say. Thank you to my patrons, they're the ones who make this show possible. Oh, don't forget to share this video on DeviantArt.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Out of the Shadows. Download it this summer.